Welcome to Echoes of the Past, the channel where history lives, breathes, and speaks. It's raw, real, and unfiltered. These are the true stories they didn't teach you in school. If you love real storytelling, ancient warfare, African kingdoms, biblical conflicts, philosophy of power, and the lost voices of the past, you belong here. Subscribe now to Echoes of the Past, because the past isn't dead.
Africa was not a jungle. Empires, spiritual traditions.
The Forgotten African Soldiers of World War II. The year was 1939. Across the African continent, the sun rose on lands under European control. Britain, France, Belgium, and Italy ruled vast territories stretching from the deserts of the north to the jungles of the equator. When war broke out in Europe, the colonial powers turned their gaze to Africa, not as a land of free people, but as a reservoir of manpower and resources. Young men from villages and towns, some eager for adventure, others pressed into service, were summoned to fight for causes they barely understood. They were told they were defending freedom, yet theirs was still denied. For Britain, France, and Belgium, the colonies were not optional. They were lifelines. Without African soldiers, the war effort would have been gravely weakened. This was the beginning of a forgotten chapter, one written in blood and sand, in rain and fire. Recruitment in Africa was a patchwork of persuasion, promises, and raw coercion. Colonial officers told tales of honor, pay, and travel, yet behind closed doors, tribal chiefs were pressured to supply quotas of young men. In French West Africa, the tirailleurs sénégalais, veterans of World War I, were called back to duty alongside thousands of fresh recruits. In British territories, the King's African Rifles and West African Frontier Force swelled in numbers. Some men joined willingly, hoping for steady pay or to escape poverty. But for many, the decision was not theirs. Families watched as sons were taken, sometimes by force, to serve in wars waged thousands of miles from home. In villages, drums beat not for celebration, but to announce departure. Across the vast landscapes of the continent, recruitment posters in English, French, and even Swahili called men to arms. The imagery showed proud African soldiers saluting under Union Jacks and tricolors, rifles on their shoulders. The message was clear: this was a noble fight. But what these posters never revealed was the reality. African soldiers would often be sent to the harshest fronts, endure the worst rations, and be paid less than their European counterparts. They would march in the deserts of North Africa, trek through Burmese jungles, and storm Italian fortresses in East Africa. Yet even before setting foot on foreign soil, they faced discrimination, sometimes from the very armies they were asked to save. Training camps sprang up from Nigeria to Kenya, from Senegal to the Belgian Congo. Under the relentless African sun, raw recruits learned the ways of modern war. The clatter of rifles, the thud of boots, the bark of commands in foreign tongues filled the air. British officers drilled their troops in desert maneuvers, while French instructors prepared theirs for European-style trench warfare. Some Africans adapted quickly. Hunters from the savannah mastering marksmanship, porters from the mountains enduring long marches without complaint. Yet training was not just about skill. It was about breaking the will to resist orders. The men learned discipline, but also the silent endurance of injustice, sleeping in overcrowded huts, eating meager rations, wearing uniforms that often did not fit. The war was not a distant rumble. It came to Africa's own soil. In the north, Mussolini's Italy invaded British Somaliland and advanced toward Kenya and Sudan. In the west, Vichy French forces clashed with Free French and British troops in Dakar and Chad. In the east, Ethiopia, already scarred by Italian occupation, became a battleground once again. African soldiers fought to defend their homelands from becoming stepping stones for European ambitions. For the first time, many saw that this war was not just for Europe. Africa's fate was tied to its outcome. The deserts, jungles, and highlands of the continent became the first proving grounds for tens of thousands of African troops. By 1940, thousands of African soldiers were on the move, transported by trucks, trains, and sometimes on foot across vast distances. Their destination, the deserts of North Africa. In the blinding sun and freezing nights, they would face the formidable German Afrika Korps under the command of Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. Nigerian, Ghanaian, and Sudanese battalions were folded into the British 8th Army, while Senegalese and Chadian troops fought under Free French banners. The desert became a crucible where their endurance, already forged in the harshness of their homelands, would be tested against tanks, artillery, and the relentless heat. While the Desert War raged in the north, another battle unfolded in the east. The East African campaign pitted Allied forces, heavily manned by African soldiers from Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia, against the Italians in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. It was here that Emperor Haile Selassie, exiled for 5 years, returned alongside Ethiopian patriots and allied African regiments to reclaim his throne. The battles were brutal, fought in steep mountains, dense bushlands, and arid plains. African soldiers carried heavy machine guns up cliffs, traversed rivers swollen by rains, and ambushed Italian convoys with deadly precision. Their victories in East Africa would mark one of the first turning points for the Allies in World War II. The Battle of Keren in Eritrea 1941 was one of the most ferocious fights African troops faced. The Italians had fortified the mountain passes, making them almost impregnable. Nigerian and Sudanese units, alongside Indian troops, fought day and night to take the heights. For weeks they endured artillery bombardments and sniper fire, scaling rocky cliffs under cover of darkness. Many fell, their bodies lying in the ravines. When the Allies finally broke through, the victory was stained with the memory of thousands of dead, men whose names were rarely recorded in the histories written later. As the war dragged on, Rommel's Afrika Korps pushed deep into Allied lines. African troops found themselves in desperate defensive actions, digging trenches in the sands, camouflaging themselves against aerial reconnaissance, and enduring weeks without proper supplies. Many went hungry, surviving on half rations and brackish water. Yet they held the line at Tobruk, at El Alamein, and along the Libyan frontier, buying precious time for reinforcements. October 1942, El Alamein, the battle that would turn the tide in North Africa. Under General Bernard Montgomery, Allied forces, including thousands of African soldiers from across the continent, launched a massive counterattack against Rommel's positions. In the chaos of night bombardments, African infantry stormed minefields, cut through barbed wire, and overran machine gun nests. The victory at El Alamein forced the Axis into retreat, and Churchill himself would later say, "Before Alamein, we never had a victory." Yet few would remember that among those who secured that victory were men from Lagos, Dakar, Khartoum, and Accra. As Axis forces retreated, West African divisions made an epic journey across the Sahara to join the campaign in Tunisia. For weeks they marched through blistering heat, carrying heavy gear and weapons, their uniforms soaked with sweat and sand. Many suffered from heat stroke and exhaustion, but their arrival bolstered the final push that drove Axis troops from North Africa in 1943. For many African soldiers, the war now shifted far from home. Transported by ship across the Mediterranean, they landed in Italy and southern France. In Italy, the tirailleurs Senegalais and Nigerian regiments slogged through snow-covered mountains, liberating towns from German occupation. In Provence, African troops were among the first to storm beaches during Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France in August 1944. The French population cheered, yet even in liberation, the African soldiers were often ordered to camp outside towns, their presence deemed unseemly for the white civilians they had just freed. While Europe burned, thousands of African soldiers were shipped to the jungles of Burma to fight the Japanese. Nigerians, Ghanaians, Sierra Leoneans, and Gambians were thrown into one of the harshest environments on Earth: dense jungle, sweltering humidity, leeches, and monsoon rains. They fought alongside British and Indian troops, building roads, clearing supply lines, and engaging in fierce jungle warfare. Diseases like malaria and dysentery claimed more lives than bullets. Yet the African divisions played a decisive role in pushing the Japanese back from India's eastern frontier. In Southeast Asia, African troops took part in river crossings and amphibious assaults against heavily fortified Japanese positions. They rode through crocodile-infested waters, under cover of darkness, their boats silent except for the dip of oars. Once ashore, they fought hand-to-hand in bamboo thickets, their bayonets glinting in the dim light. These operations were small in scale compared to Europe, but no less dangerous. Not all African servicemen were frontline fighters. Tens of thousands served as porters, drivers, engineers, and mechanics. They carried supplies over mountains, built airstrips in the jungle, and repaired vehicles under enemy fire. Their labor kept the war machine moving, yet their contributions were often dismissed as support work, unworthy of medals or recognition. Without them, the Allied advance in Africa, Europe, and Asia would have ground to a halt. Winter in the Apennines was unlike anything African soldiers had ever known. Used to the heat of the tropics and deserts, they now marched through snowdrifts and icy winds. Their boots froze solid overnight, and rations arrived late through treacherous passes. Yet they fought on, capturing hilltop villages and fortresses from entrenched German defenders. French commanders relied heavily on the tirailleurs sénégalais in these brutal assaults, knowing their discipline and endurance could withstand even the deadliest conditions. These victories in Italy helped open the road to Rome, a symbolic moment in the war's European theater. August 1944, while the world remembers D-Day in Normandy, fewer speak of Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. Here, tens of thousands of African soldiers from Morocco, Algeria, Senegal, Chad, and beyond landed on the beaches of Provence under a hail of German fire. They advanced through vineyards and villages, liberating towns one after another. French civilians cheered their arrival, but soon after, Paris ordered the blanchiment, the whitening, of its liberation forces. Many African soldiers were removed from the capital's liberation parade and replaced with white European troops. They had shed blood for freedom, only to be erased from its celebration. In the final months of the European War, African soldiers crossed the Rhine, entering Germany itself. They were among the first to see the devastation, bombed-out cities, starving civilians, and the ruins of the Nazi war machine. In some towns, locals looked on with fear. Never having seen African men before, propaganda had painted them as monsters. Yet many of these soldiers showed humanity, sharing rations with German children. History would overlook their role in this final decisive push toward victory. Far from Europe, the African divisions in Burma achieved one of their most grueling victories, breaking through Japanese lines in the Arakan and Central Burma campaigns. These battles were fought in choking heat amid swarms of insects and under constant threat of ambush. Their role in clearing Japanese strongholds allowed the Allies to retake vital supply routes into China. Yet, while their British comrades were awarded medals and public honors, many African soldiers returned home with nothing but memories and malaria scars. May 1945, victory in Europe. Crowds in London, Paris, and New York erupted in celebration. For the African soldiers stationed in Europe, the war was over, but they were not invited to the great parades. In some cases, colonial authorities shipped them home quietly, fearing that exposure to Europe's freedoms might fuel independence movements. They had fought for democracy abroad, yet colonialism at home remained untouched. Even after Germany's surrender, African soldiers continued to serve in Asia until Japan's capitulation in August 1945. Some guarded captured Japanese officers, others maintained supply lines in Southeast Asia. The news of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki reached them in remote outposts, signaling that their long ordeal was nearly over. But their homecoming would bring no hero's welcome. Troopships carried African veterans back across the oceans they had crossed years earlier. Some had left as teenagers and returned as hardened men. They stepped ashore expecting recognition, but in many colonies there were no parades, no medals, just orders to return to the fields, the mines, or unemployment. In some cases, they were even made to pay back their uniforms if they wanted to keep them. November 1944, in the Senegalese town of Thiaroye, African soldiers returning from Europe demanded the back pay and benefits they were owed. The French authorities stalled, offering only a fraction. Tensions rose, and on December 1st, French troops opened fire on the unarmed veterans, killing dozens, possibly hundreds. This massacre became a symbol of colonial betrayal. Men who had fought for France, shot down by the very nation they had defended. In the post-war years, the official histories written in Europe and America mentioned the African contribution only in passing. School children in the colonies learned more about Napoleon and Trafalgar than about African regiments in El Alamein or Burma. In Europe, many never knew Africans had fought at all. Their stories lived on only in oral histories told by elders, fading with each passing year. Yet the war had changed Africa forever. African soldiers who had traveled the world returned with new perspectives. They had seen nations where white men argued with their governments, where ordinary people could vote, where freedom was not just a word. This planted the seeds of post-war independence movements. Many veterans became leaders in the struggle for decolonization, bringing the discipline and organizational skills they had learned in the army to political activism. In the decades after the war, France slowly acknowledged the role of the tirailleurs sénégalais, but often symbolically, a memorial here, a mention there. Many veterans still waited for full pensions, and some only received them after long legal battles in the 21st century. In 2006, President Jacques Chirac finally announced that African veterans' pensions would be equalized with their French counterparts, a gesture that came far too late for most. In Britain, recognition came even slower. The King's African Rifles and West African Frontier Force were disbanded quietly after the war, their battle honors fading into regimental archives. For decades, official commemorations rarely mentioned African contributions, focusing instead on British, Canadian, and Anzac forces. Only in recent years have public historians begun restoring their place in the narrative. In the 21st century, documentaries, historians, and descendants of veterans have begun to reclaim the story. Monuments have been built in Dakar, Abuja, Nairobi, and other cities to honor the African soldiers of Wabiwara. Their faces, once absent from textbooks, now appear in exhibitions, reminding the world that without Africa's sons, victory might have been impossible. Today, only a handful of these veterans remain alive, their memories sharp even as their bodies age. They speak not only of battles, but of friendships across cultures, of the taste of tea in the trenches, of the letters that never reached home. They are the living bridge between Africa's past and the world's history, a reminder that their fight was not just for empire, but for human dignity. The story of Africa's soldiers in World War II is a story of courage, sacrifice, and betrayal. They fought for freedoms they themselves did not yet enjoy. They stood in the deserts of Libya, the snows of Italy, the jungles of Burma, and the streets of liberated France. And when the guns fell silent, many were cast aside, their names missing from the rolls of honor. To remember them is to restore a missing chapter in the world's history. The debt owed to them is not just in pensions or medals. It is in truth, in recognition, and in never letting their story be forgotten again. Please, if you like these videos, like it, share it, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful historical events in the world.